Good morning. This is the KC and KW show. We are coming live to you from South Florida, right here on the beautiful shores of the St. Lucie River in Stuart, Florida. Today, my co-host is reporting from Southern Florida, so he's not in the studio with me this morning, but he is going to be joining us via Zoom, so we're still going to have a really good show. And as we had mentioned last week, we're going to be talking a lot about the infrastructure here in America and the weaknesses with that. We've been covering a lot of the border crisis that's going on, and this is just another part of the things that we need to really be concerned about here. I want to remind everybody we are live every Thursday at 10 a.m., and we're also on YouTube where you can join us. And I'm watching the Facebook live feed, so if you have any questions or comments, we'll certainly bring you into the show via Facebook live feed as well. So good morning, everybody. We have a good show on tap. So KW, how are you doing this morning?
Good morning, KC.
Morning.
Doing wonderful. How are you?
We are doing well, doing well. Miss having you here in the studio, but you never know where you're going to be. I think 2 weeks ago you were down on the border in Arizona, so here we go.
I know. I tell you what. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, they say. So hopefully, I'll do a good job with you on the live feed today.
That's great, KW. Absolutely. I had mentioned to the listeners we're going to be talking about the infrastructure, and that was something that you had brought up last week with a gentleman that you had interviewed on the border. I think he had about 10 miles of fencing on the border.
That's right. Yeah, we were down, for everybody's benefit, we were down in Cochise County, Arizona with John Ladd. And John is a long-term family rancher in the Arizona region. And he has 16,000 acres of land that are contiguous to the U.S.-Mexico border, with 10 and a half miles of that land directly on the border.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And speaking of farming, I think that's one of the areas we wanted to touch base on. Here in America, many of our farmers' land has been sold to foreign entities. And it's actually a surprising and astounding figure. It's kind of funny. I was doing a little bit of research for the show to find out if I could let the folks know exactly how much land has been purchased. And there's not a lot of recent statistics out there I was able to run across. But in 2006, there was a lot of articles about the ports and also about farmland. Ports was another thing I wanted to talk about. But with the farmland, in 2019, NPR did do a good series of the farmland that has been purchased. And, they're saying it's likely that American land, much of it, will end up in foreign hands, and that's the farmers' land, because there are no restrictions on ownership. The median age of our U.S. farmers are 55, and many face retirement, and their family members no longer want to carry on the torch. And they're saying the National Young Farmers Coalition anticipates that 2/3 of the nation's farmland will change hands in the next few decades. So they're looking at nearly 30 million acres of U.S. farmland is now held with foreign investors. One that's particularly large that really people should be concerned with is back in 2013, Smithfield Foods, the largest pork producer, was acquired by a Chinese firm. So they do own our Smithfield Foods. And with that came around 146,000 acres of prime farmland. So these are things we really need to be concerned about, right, KW?
Yeah, absolutely, Casey. And it's been a quiet takeover, essentially, of our food processing and our agricultural industry, not just by the Chinese, but essentially foreign interests. But obviously, China has the big checkbook, and they have multiple, I say multiple, hundreds, if not thousands, of offshore entities to acquire these assets with. What's most concerning, or what should be most concerning to Americans, is that where is the U.S. government? Well, we know they're not doing their job, but where are they when it comes to, essentially critical industries, critical assets, critical infrastructure, and that could be pharmaceuticals, food processing, energy assets, and technology, and protecting the United States from allowing this to happen. And so, you kind of have to go back to the question and answer of, are the Democrats and Republicans that are essentially in office today, I'm talking about the leadership cadre, not the junior members, are they essentially funded and bought and paid for by offshore interest to allow these things to continue to happen. For example, going back to Hillary Clinton and the Clinton administration as well, Uranium One, and selling our uranium and other assets to foreign interest.
Yes, KW, and I can actually follow up with a couple things there. Number one, on the foreign-owned lands, you're right, it's not just China. Canada is a top owner of American farmlands at 6.87 million acres. The Netherlands follows at 4.87 million acres. Germany with 1.94 million acres. The United Kingdom at 1.7 million. Italy is 1.4 million, and France with 1.04. And then you brought up the pharmaceuticals. I think all of us were stunned when COVID hit and we found out we were so dependent on China for our pharmaceuticals. This is really something that, you asked the question, what are our legislators doing about this?
Well, the reality is they're doing nothing. This has been part of the globalist expansion of, or globalism. But more importantly, it's been more to do with the offshoring of U.S. industries for the last 30 plus years. And for everybody's benefit, remember this all started with the concept of just-in-time inventory, right? We don't need to make everything here. We can offshore it and outsource it to China, to Germany, to South America, wherever the consultants were pointing at the time. And on paper, it sounded great. But what was really happening was it was essentially the beginning of the destruction of U.S. manufacturing. Because once you start what they call just-in-time inventory, meaning you could make it elsewhere cheaper and more efficient, according to the experts, well, what you're doing is you're basically reducing your ability to produce for yourself in critical times of need. And 30 years later, we found out that, well, geez, our pharmaceutical industry had been completely offshored. We couldn't even make penicillin in the United States. All of our technology had been stolen, offshored, sold. All of our manufacturing base had been moved offshore. And the really only thing we have left, and we'll talk about today, Casey, is our energy industry. Manufacturing base had been moved offshore. And the really only thing we have left, and we'll talk about today, Casey, is our energy industry. Casey?
Hold on one sec. Hey, KW, sorry about that. I just had a call come in from a very wonderful person up in Michigan, where I'm from, and her name is Deborah Comstock, and she is a farmer that had done an op-ed on the fact that foreign lands are taking over. The foreign countries are taking over a lot of the American land and what it means. So she just has a couple minutes here and just offered to weigh in her opinion of what that means here. And I just thought it'd be good to actually hear from one of the farmers from Boots on the Ground. So, Deborah, how are you doing?
I'm doing just great. It's a beautiful day in Michigan.
I miss Michigan somewhat, especially in August and July when it's beautiful summer. I'm down in South Florida now and love the weather here. I appreciate you calling in. And folks, this is a spur-of-the-moment call. We have not been able to talk ahead of time. So, Deborah, I appreciate you just making the effort here to join the show. So tell us a little bit. I had mentioned your op-ed and the dramatic increase of foreign-owned lands. And if you can just tell us a little bit about what that means to the farming community and why Americans should be concerned about this.
Well, there's a lot of pressure on farmers and agricultural land right now from a number of different aspects. Some of my subsequent articles have been on solar and wind farm products, which have become farm products for farmers. They are very much in favor of it, but a lot of people are not in favor of those products being farm products. We got to take a step back here and think about the farmer. There is no other business that is at the mercy of so much that they don't control. That is the weather, whether we get rain or not. The price of their product is totally unpredictable, and at market jurisdiction. I mean, you don't know at the end of the season whether soybeans are going to be at a good price or a bad price, or corn or whatever. So it's the highest risk business anybody could ever undertake, and I don't think we appreciate that about the farmer. So when we have issues like drought and we have flooding, the farmer is really in a bad place. And after so much of that, and when we have climate change, farmers tend to want to just sell their land. It's very difficult for them to maintain, and especially when people have such issues about giving up agricultural land. But they do it. In the article I wrote, nearly 30 million acres of U.S. farmland is now owned by foreign countries.
It's an incredible amount of land, and it continues on as well. I had mentioned that a lot of farmers are retiring, and their heirs are selling the property. It's not a business they want to go into.
Please go to all
You also mentioned wind farms, and I had seen, I think it was in your article, Netherlands purchased 64,000 acres, and the reason, it wasn't your article, it's a different one, but the reason is cold hard cash. Dutch nationalized pension is 130%. The size of nation's gross domestic product, and so the profits from the farmlands goes to support the pensions in the country. So we're seeing a lot of our land exchange hands, and we no longer own it.
Well, that's right, and that's exactly right. I mean, think about that the Dutch purchased the land to subsidize their own wealth in their own countries, and that's totally at our expense. I mean, I could cite some of the numbers of acres owned by the foreign countries in the article. For example, the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting tool indicates that Canada is the top owner of American farmlands at 6.87 million acres. The Netherlands following at 4.87 acres, Germany with 1.94, United Kingdom at 1.7, Italy at 1.4, and France with a 1.04 million acres. I mean, that's a lot of farmland going to foreign countries that actually we could turn into wind and solar farms, keep our farmlands, and of course you know, Casey, that if we turn those into wind and solar farms, we keep the agricultural land, and we can keep those as farm properties as well. For example, on a solar farm, you can raise sheep.
And I think the big point here too, Deborah, is once this land is gone, it's gone, folks. This is our American soil that we have sold to foreign entities. And, you know, there's almost 15 million acres, maybe a little bit more that you just mentioned, almost 20 million acres that we know has already went into foreign hands.
Yeah.
It's very sad. So Deborah, I so much appreciate you calling into the show here, and I know I put you on the spot because we didn't have time to talk ahead of time, but folks, this is very real, and Deborah's in Adrian, Michigan, I believe, and it's something that we all should be alarmed at, and it's kind of sad to see that our farmlands and farming is going by the wayside, and those lands, like I said, once they're gone, and it's a huge infrastructure issue, and I know KW you're going to be touching on and have already other infrastructure issues, but you know, Deborah, do you see that the legislature, the government has done anything to curtail some of this purchasing of the land?
Well, I am a little bit discouraged. We have a guy named Vilsack that came back into our Department of Ag under Biden, and while I support President Biden every step of the way, I think we need to rethink our entire ag system. We've got subsidies coming into these farmers. Some of this land is sitting idle, and again, the farmers appreciate the subsidies, but let's rethink our entire ag system. For example, big ag, CAFO systems, you know, commercial farm systems, are polluting our waters and our soil. They're using way too much manure on the land. It's running into the rivers. In Michigan, many of our rivers are polluted because of this and because of the overload of fertilizer. If we think about changing up a farm product to, let's say, solar or wind, we don't have the fertilizer running into the rivers. It's still farmland. We can raise sheep on those lands, or goats, or whatever, and actually even some vegetable crops on those lands, and keep the farm land in our ownership. In addition, when you let that farmland rest under a solar situation specifically, that farmland is only enriching. Remember the Dust Bowl, when we used the soil up. We had no more topsoil. because we overused it planting too many crops. Under a solar system, that soil will rest for many years and still be our land and be in great shape for agricultural reproduction after that. Same with wind. If you put up a wind turbine, that's not taking any more than probably an acre of land, and the rest of that remains agricultural and supports that farmer to be able to maintain his farm and his ownership.
Deborah, you're absolutely right. Thank you so much. We appreciate your input here this morning. KW, do you have any questions for Deborah while she's still on the line?
No, I think Deborah's did a great job. I mean, the reality is, there is no, for lack of a better term, oversight here on the acquisition and control of our critical infrastructure assets. I mean, it's just the way it is, and it goes across all of our industries, and we can talk more about that. So
Yes.
agriculture is one of many.
Yes, absolutely. Deborah, thank you so very much. I appreciate your input here this morning.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much, Kate.
You got it. You take care.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye now. KW, I have a question here on Facebook. It came in earlier. Tom Michaud, could the Supreme Court of the United States remove the president and vice president if they don't obey the Constitution? Little off topic what we're talking about, but a very good question.
Well, I mean, there's two answers. One is what most Americans are asking today: where is the Supreme Court? Because they are missing in action on all fronts. They have refused to take up any constitutional cases whatsoever. So one could argue that SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, is a non-factor in our American rulemaking policies today. I don't know whether they have the power to remove the president or the vice president. I believe that is the purview of the Senate.
Ken Vreeland, you asked Deborah what she produces, and she is off the line now. I can tell you that that area of Michigan is heavily farmed with corn and soybeans. So I don't know 100% that that's what Deborah does, but more than likely she's either farming corn and soybeans. So KW, let's talk a little bit more about other infrastructure. I know I was on the phone talking to Deborah real quick when you were covering issues before, but this is your strength and your background is infrastructure. And there are so many areas, and Deborah touched on something that impacts us here in South Florida so much, and that's, environmental issues with our water. But we certainly have that here in South Florida as well. We can talk a little bit more in general on water, not just pollution that has runoff, phosphates, and that type of thing, and phosphorus, but also our infrastructure of water systems throughout the United States. That's another issue that is facing a crisis. For example, Flint, Michigan.
Well, I mean, the reality is, the water supplies around the U.S. have been compromised in many industrial areas since the 50s, when there was really no regulation, there was no oversight. Many of the U.S. name brand corporations like General Electric, General Dynamics, and others, that they just polluted and dumped, and that's all been cleaned up over the years. In the 1980s, we saw the Superfund sites and everything else happen. What we're facing today in the U.S., Casey, is, I think, a fundamental just mispricing of the value of water. Okay, when it comes to, for example, if you go out in the western United States, water rights have to be purchased and acquired and they're owned. Whereas in Florida, they don't have water rights. Now, I believe, for example, in South Florida, for example, our backyard, we are going to move to what we call a water rights model, because it's the water value is mispriced. Okay, we've got so much growth that there's going to have to be an increase in the price of water commodity. Now, with that comes, of course, if water becomes more commoditized, then there's going to be more emphasis put on keeping it clean, because clearly therein lies your balancing act. And I think that's the problem on the East Coast of the U.S. People don't realize that water is a valuable commodity and it should be priced accordingly. But pollution. We're still dealing with major Superfund sites and industrial cleanup sites across the country. Look at what's happening just recently over near Tampa. Okay, the old phosphate mine that basically now the ponds are leaking, and they're leaking into or they're going to be drained into Tampa Bay to prevent the dikes from essentially failing.
Right.
These are legacy assets from, industrial days.
Very much. Michael Burns, we talk a little bit more back about on the farming issue. In Texas, our windmills froze during our bad winter storm. It will not stand up against very cold weather lamps, right? That's an interesting point to make with windmills. We're a very large country, we're a vast country, but interesting that they froze up. I'm not sure how to answer that, Michael Burns, because I don't know the answer. I can tell you there are many windmill farms in Michigan, which of course gets very cold, so there might be different technologies for different windmills. I'm not sure, but interesting thing to
Well,
point out.
Casey, if I may add, the problem we have with renewable energy is that the byproduct of renewable energy is toxic, and we don't have any real way to deal with it. For example, most people don't understand that when we retire wind turbines, the wind blades we can't do anything with. So there are boneyards in the desert where we have to basically dig big pits and just put these old blades that have toxic materials in them in these massive pits. We don't have the proper way to dispose of the battery technology when the battery's useful life has ended. We don't have proper ways to dispose of the solar panels when the useful life has ended. And then when you look at the energy and the thermal energy component that goes into constructing these renewable assets, wind, solar, and battery, it is far greater and far more pollutive than just burning natural gas, for example. So the renewable energy industry, while it's sexy on paper, is very dirty behind the scenes.
And this is something you really know a lot about, KW. Again, that's one of your strengths and your background, and you travel and advise worldwide on infrastructure projects. So, that comes to fruition, or it brings up to the conversation. It's not just renewable energy, but what is the solution? I'm thinking that Biden, the coal mines was a huge contention for the Democrats, allowing our coal miners to use those resources. And Donald Trump supported that, where, of course, Biden and the left do not. Kind of what do you feel about that? And again, what is the solution for our energy sources?
Well, look, I mean, the reality is we have an abundance of natural gas available to us in the United States. Due to, millions of years of geologic formations that we could spend hours talking about, the reality is we are now able with technology to tap it cleanly and effectively. Okay, most people, the word that they use is fracking. Now, what fracking does is it allows us to tap into deposits of natural gas that we normally were not able to tap into. So we have plentiful clean energy. Yes, should we have some solar and some wind? Of course. We already have quite a bit of solar and quite a bit of wind for everybody's benefit. We have wind corridors in California, in the Midwest, and in Texas that, frankly, we have too much. And as we saw in Texas, over-reliance on wind is a problem. So we have to basically recognize that we have a box that we have to work in. And that box is economical for our industrial base and for our consumers. If we basically try to enact what they're calling the Green New Deal now, for example, it will bankrupt our country. Okay, I want everybody to understand. I've been doing this 30 plus years. There is no way possible to enact any form of what I don't call, whether you call it liberals, Democrats, socialists, or anybody enacting a Green New Deal. It will bankrupt our country, and it is not practical. We cannot run the country on renewable energy. It's not possible. And number two, the cost to do that would put a tax on the consumer via your utility bill, because everybody has to pay for this. Nothing's free. All of this new Green New Deal is going to be billed to the consumer via your general electric bill that you get every month, because they'll pass it through to the utilities. And it will basically destroy the average American household's ability to pay their bills. If you're paying $500 a month for electricity today, in a hot summer month, you're going to pay $1,000 when they're done with you. And so the question is, that's going to be, maybe a half or a third of your house notes for some people.
So you touched on something. I'm going to go back a little bit, and that's fracking. That's a very controversial process. And KW, I'd love to talk to you a little bit and hear your opinion. The implications of fracking. I've heard about the downfalls of fracking. You hear people that have fire coming out of their faucets, and the cattle are becoming sick. Is fracking that dangerous, or what is your opinion on that? I'd just like to hear from somebody that's been, that has some knowledge
Yeah.
on fracking.
Yeah, initially I will tell everybody, initially, and this is public information, when the fracking first started and it became commercialized, not because fracking's been around forever, horizontal drilling's been around forever, but fracking on a wholesale basis to really run big commercial wells in areas like North Dakota, the Marcellus Shale, which is Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and of course down in the Permian Basin, Texas and New Mexico. When we started to wholesale frack, which was basically requiring us to essentially inject, the water solutions into the wells to open up the wells to allow the gas to flow, I was initially cautious because I wanted to understand what the chemical composite of that was and whether we were going to have any repercussions. But as we went through the process, we determined that the solutions, the chemicals that go into the well heads, that go well down into the geologic formations, well beneath the drinking water, are not harming us at all, and that's the reality. Now, I mean, can there be repercussions in some pockets? Because remember, you're dealing with geologic formations where, there can be leaks and fissures in the land. We have sinkholes, for example. You wonder, well, so occasionally you'll have something, but on average, fracking is very safe, very reliable, and it's a very common to re-inject water and re-inject wastewater into the earth. Okay, it's a very common thing that's been done. It's being done today all over the country and has nothing to do with fracking. So ASR wells, for example, here in South Florida, we can store water, we can inject water, we can re-inject it into the geologic formation. So I think fracking is a very positive thing for this country because it's allowed us to essentially get off of the dependence on the Middle East and Russia and Venezuela and also North African oil when at a time, and natural gas, because we were importing natural gas through LNG. It allowed us to do that and reestablish our industrial base at a cost that was beneficial, because our big problem in the U.S., KC, is cost to produce. Our labor pool is so expensive here. So if we have cheap energy input, that basically offsets our high labor cost in a manufacturing process. Now, what the liberals and the leftists and the socialists want to do is they want to push us back offshore. So how do you do that? You start to damage and shut down your energy infrastructure by canceling pipelines, canceling leases. And that's the problem we're facing today.
Yes, I mean, the pipeline, it's a huge issue right now, and I think I read that some of the states are considering suing the Biden administration for shutting that pipeline down. When you talk about that too, KW, our reliance on foreign entities for our energy, for our food, as we talk about farmlands, that is something that we all should be very concerned about as well, right?
Absolutely, and I want to speak to, we're in South Florida today, so let's talk about South Florida just as a case in point. But we could talk about the Midwest, we could talk about California. The reality is, we're blessed in Florida, with a lot of things. And the number one thing we need to protect in South Florida is our agricultural industry, because that's what feeds the United States in the winter. Most people don't realize we grow the winter vegetables here for the United States, KC. And so we have an agricultural area in Florida that is absolutely critical, not only to our own food source, but the country. And also we export. And, we've got to protect that from the special interests, the bad actors, and, the politicians who have been captured by these offshore and special interest groups. And if we don't recognize that today, right now, after coming off the back of COVID, when will we ever recognize it? So we can have clean water, and we can have agriculture, and we can have ranching. We don't have to sell it out to third world countries, and we don't have to basically make golf courses. send shopping malls out of it, and then have to import our food from third world countries. We have to protect what's ours, and the only two things we have left are energy and food production. That's it. We've basically given everything else away.
And we're starting to give that away, and it's very frightening if you think about all the lands right here and in our country that we have sold to foreign entities. I want to backtrack 1 second. You had mentioned ASR wells, just to let folks know what that is. They're aquifer storage recovery wells, and here in Florida, they're used for different purposes, but right in the Stewart area, we have discharges from Lake Okeechobee, and there are too many discharges. The freshwater ruins our brackish water, so they're trying to figure out ways to stop so many of these discharges, and ASR wells are one of those options. And it's unique, or it's interesting, because they'll inject the fresh water into these wells. The water table down below is brackish, and because it's fresh water and brackish water, there's a bubble of fresh water that stays right by the well, and you can pull it back up and use it in times of drought. So a very interesting technology that has been around for decades. And speaking of infrastructure, KW, let's talk a little bit about President Biden's infrastructure plan to raise taxes. He is suggesting that the federal corporate tax rate be raised from 21 to 28%, folks. And this is the highest in the world. Combined U.S. corporate rate under President Biden's jobs would be the highest in the Organization for Economic and Cooperation Development. It's 37 member countries. We would have the highest. This is so disappointing to me, because under President Trump, he did lower the tax rates, and unemployment went down. Jobs were more plentiful, and also wages were increasing. So now, imposing a higher tax, I mean, this is going to be very detrimental to our workforce.
Well, Casey, their taxes have multiple levels, and so I want everybody to understand it's not just what we call the rack rate tax, okay? The reality is that the U.S. economy, as it stands today, and the trajectory that look, let's everybody understand, it's not the Biden-Harris tax drive, okay? It's a socialistic drive that's going to basically bury the U.S. economy. And what that means is that the overall tax to the consumer is going to be well over 50% when you factor into the equation how much you pay for gas at the fuel pump, okay? How much you pay for your electricity bill every month, how much you pay for your water bill every month. Your base. So these are all hidden taxes, right? Because they slip these into the rate base due to federal regulatory abilities. Remember, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission runs what? Oversees our pipelines, our transmission distribution systems, and then when they issue all these subsidies, they push them down into the states, and then the state utility companies basically just add that to the rate base. So when you look at the corporate tax, when you look at the fuel tax, when you look at the electricity tax, water tax, and other sales taxes, our overall tax rate is going to be well over 50+%. Now, and if you go to New York City today, of course, you're paying probably 60 all in. But my point to you is this, and to the viewers is this: it's not just a static rate increase; it's an across-the-board assault on all of our consumables, and that's the only way that you can pay for a socialistic agenda. You've got to tax everything. So what will manufacturers do? If they have import tariffs or locals, they'll just add to that. They'll pass that on to the consumer. So you'll see it in everything you buy. You'll see it in the bottle of water you purchase. It'll go from $1.69 to $1.89. Whatever it is, it'll be passed on, so that effective tax rate will be excessively higher than the corporate tax rate that the corporations pay. That's the point I want to make. The consumers are going to pay the bill.
The consumers are going to pay the bill, but the other implication that I believe will happen again, as it has in the past, is corporations will leave the country and manufacture where they have cheaper labor. As long as they're able to import their goods and make more money, that's what they're going to do. I mean, they're forced to do it when you have the highest tax rate. They're forced to go elsewhere. So I think it's a double-edged sword. Yes, we're going to pay more as consumers, but we're also going to lose good-paying jobs.
Well, that's exactly the point, and that's the purpose of that's been the model that we've been under for the last 30 years, Casey. That's really taken this country down. And as I can only speak for the energy and infrastructure sector, and I work globally, but I'm obviously plugged into the U.S. And we've done everything we can to protect the U.S. energy independence or road to independence, because we know that everything that happens in this country from an industrial, manufacturing, and operational perspective depends on how much that unleaded gas is, how much that diesel gas is, how much that natural gas is, because that's your base, that's the majority of your cost. Transportation, if diesel gas goes to, or diesel fuel goes to $6 a gallon, I mean, the amount of pass-through cost to the consumer is going to be off the charts. So it's directly correlated to the offshoring of the U.S. industry, because if you basically make energy and infrastructure so expensive in the U.S. with labor, okay, to your point, then yes, everything will find a cheaper home. But the problem is when you re-import it into the United States, that's when it becomes that much more expensive. And then when you have a crisis like we just had in COVID, and we're looking for supplies, and basically, let's just say Mr. X is the president and says, well, I'm going to basically, federalize, under the National Defense Act, General Electric and Ford and others to start making things, and they say, well, we don't have the ability to manufacture that.
Absolutely right. And also to your point previously about the energy, trying to keep our energy local, and I mean, whether it's coal, whether it's oil, natural gas. Another part of the Biden infrastructure plan is to eliminate certain deductions and credits for the fossil fuel industry. That's another way to shut down our fossil fuel industry right here in the United States and force companies to go elsewhere or increase our reliance on foreign providers.
Well, Casey, the energy industry, and I'm talking about renewable as well as fossil fuel, operates off of tax credits. Tax credits are critical. Nobody invests in solar or wind without tax credits. The oil and gas industry, in the U.S. was originally private partnerships that were tax-driven partnerships because it was uneconomical to drill at early in the 80s and 70s without the tax benefit. That's what fostered the investment. So you have to have tax incentives, but you can't have tax incentives that are weighted one way or the other. They have to be balanced. And the problem is now we've got a regime in place that wants to essentially tilt the game towards very expensive renewables and add to the disadvantage of our very cheap, very clean natural gas, okay, which is very critical to our, we need natural gas for our chemical facilities, for our fertilizer plants, for all of our power plants. Most people don't realize that the majority of our power plants have been converted to natural gas, and we're building more. Okay, and if we don't have that gas, we're not going to be able to generate electricity in this country because we've shut down a lot of our coal plants.
And that's another thing that's a frightening thought is our energy grid, our electrical grid across the country. That has been something that has been failing sporadically over the years. And, KW, there is so much aging infrastructure in this country, and it is a problem. So I think that what we need to focus on with our elected officials is what the solution is, right? It's not raising taxes. It's not eliminating these deductions for like the fossil fuel industry. We have to raise money. I mean, I think Trump was on the right path of raising money by bringing manufacturing back to the United States, raising wages. If everybody's making more money, they pay more taxes in the end. And that's, in my opinion, how we fund our infrastructure projects that definitely need to be done. We've got aging bridges, we've got aging pipes and lead pipes. I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, KW?
Well, yes, the U.S. infrastructure, our domestic infrastructure is aged, it's decrepit, and candidly falling apart. I mean, if you go to most U.S. airports, they're a disaster. If you go to even if you go to Dubai or you go to Paris, you go to other international locations, their airports are relatively modern and clean and organized, but our bridge and infrastructure system is very, very poor condition. we've got massive problems on our national highways. Our rail, for example, Amtrak rail is a disaster. Not the passenger, the infrastructure, the rail beds are a disaster. We can't run high-speed trains in the United States because our rail infrastructure is so bad. Whereas in Europe, they have the high-speed trains. In Asia, they have the high-speed trains. People ask, well, why can't we have passenger trains that are reliable and safe in the United States? I'm talking about across the country. And the reality is that the track beds are not safe because they're old, they were laid improperly, and so the problem is big, and I agree with you. But you go back to the same old question: who's going to pay for it? And if you basically say we're going to have a massive public works project, which is a boondoggle in business terms, because there will be a lot of fraud in that, then you have to basically have the industrial output to support it, the gross domestic product, and translated to your terms, you have to have the employment base to support it. And if you're outsourcing your industry, and then you're saying you're going to spend all of this money for social welfare and social works projects, I go back to the same old scenario: who's going to pay for it? And it comes back to a consumer tax, okay? And yeah, there's a corporate tax, but at the end of the day, the corporations always minimize their taxes. It's always down to the consumers. It's always on what you pay for your fuel, what you pay for your food, what you pay for your lumber. I just got a comment here. Plywood at Home Depot went from $39 last year to $99 now.
Oh my goodness.
$39 to $99 for a sheet of plywood.
That's horrific. I had no idea it has went that high. And at the same time, we have a housing boom as well. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, that translates into more expensive homes, right? More expensive materials to build them.
Well, and I can tell you, that is, and then you ask yourself, where is that material coming from? And you start looking at where did the shingles get made? Where did the lumber come from? Right? Where's the tile coming from? And you start uncovering that, and you start to see that that's not coming from the U.S. It's imported.
Well, in Florida, not that long ago, had a huge issue with the Chinese drywall, right?
Right. Well, that was an issue on the east coast of Florida, on the U.S. I mean, many cities along the coast, because they get imported into the ports, and it was a disaster, and it all had to be ripped out. But
Huge health issue.
Why don't we? We've got a clip here, a couple of clips from the Arizona trip. I thought we wanted to play if we could.
Oh, that'd be great.
Just to show how much at risk our infrastructure is, and how open we are to essentially not only incompetence in the government and our tax base, but look, I mean, let's face the fact: if people can come in and attack our infrastructure and disrupt it, we are even at further risk.
Great, Iggy, if you can cue that up.
Okay, we're on an uncompleted portion of the wall. You got the wall up, but you can see the infrastructure is not completed here. We're probably about 20 miles south, not even 20 miles, probably about 10 miles south of Nago, the border control station, and you can see essentially these are light poles that are uncompleted. There's equipment all over the place, and again, we're on the Arizona-Mexico border here. KW Miller, America First. We're just really just amazed by the two things. One is the scale. The wall that is completed is very formidable, but as you can see, there's a lot of monitoring and surveillance and lighting that's not completed, and therein lies the problem with the Biden-Harris administration regarding open border policy. If you don't manage the completion of this wall and all of the surveillance and counterintelligence that goes with it, all of the work that's been done, and the money that's been paid by American taxpayers goes to naught. Now what you can see here is, just as we come in, it's a construction zone. It's an unfinished construction zone. And this is considered waste by the Biden-Harris administration. This is all paid for, and you can see that it's just stopped. Construction has stopped here along the Arizona-Mexico border, south of Naco. And the contractors, let's get a shot here if we can. The contractors are just laid up, the equipment sitting, and nothing's happening, right? We've got essentially half completed lighting systems. We've got half completed pads. and other support equipment that the taxpayers have contracted for, that contractors have mobilized for, and fundamentally is sitting, not being utilized. And that's really a criminal event when it comes to the, what we're trying to do, which is basically lock these borders down. And that's really a sad state of affairs when it comes to open borders, when it comes to, criminal elements, drug cartels, terrorist-linked nations, and the human trafficking across the U.S. But really, this is where it happens, right down here in Arizona, Mexico, and you can see the challenges we're facing. Now we're coming across, this is the old El Paso natural gas processing facility here with the Mexican border. This has been here for a while. For those of you from the energy business. And you can see this is unmonitored. Now let me explain something to you. Let's get a shot of these pipes. It wouldn't take a terrorist a very small amount of explosives to blow that line and create havoc on our southern border with what? Our natural gas supply, okay, our interconnect with Mexico. This is what we're talking about. Look at all of the unfinished construction here along the Arizona-Mexico border. We have no border patrol out here, okay. We have some electronic surveillance stations up in the hills. We don't know if they're actually being used. And the fact that KW Miller, America First, could drive right up to a unguarded, unprotected natural gas compression station, processing station, which is critical to our infrastructure, without any security stopping me, ought to tell you right then and there that we've got a problem in this country. Okay, look at all this porous land behind me. This is basically drug cartel territory. We'll be in touch soon. We just wanted to give you this first-hand account. We're on the Arizona-New Mexico border. We're heading south, and as you can see, there is absolutely no coverage from a security perspective whatsoever. Uncompleted, unfinished.
KW, that makes me so angry. Thank you for covering that. We were doing the right thing. We were putting up a wall. President Trump had allocated a lot of funds to that, and for President Biden to come in and just put a stop to all of that money that we Americans work so hard for, pay our taxes, and we expect our government to spend it wisely, and to just go in there, shut this down, and leave it half built. See the construction equipment there, no longer used. Those jobs are no longer there. They're not employed. It absolutely makes me sick.
Well, it's, as I said, it's criminal. The reality is, contractors were paid guaranteed, they were given guaranteed contracts, Casey, and rightfully so, right? You want to lock this in and get it done. You want to order the steel, order the power line, the lighting, all of the technology that goes with it. And, the Biden administration just laid that up, not only in Arizona, but across, New Mexico, California, and Texas. And, essentially basically said, we're open for business again, right? It just basically said terrorism is not an issue. Drug, trafficking is not an issue. Human trafficking is not an issue. And look, just while I was down there in that 10.5 mile stretch, John Ladd said that they had interdicted 27 different nationalities. And that's just what they caught. Think about what you didn't catch.
That's right.
Let me, if we could, Casey, while we got time, could we just get back to, we have another small, like a 2-minute clip of the actual industrial facility I want to show, if Iggy could play that. Do we have time?
Yep, Iggy's queuing that up.
Okay. Let's listen here. I'm sorry, it was a windy day out there, so I apologize.
Security is an absolute priority. Number one, first, security first. So, remember I told you that Arizona is a major transit point for terrorist-linked organizations and countries, as well as drug cartels. right now I'm sitting on top of a high pressure pipeline. Let's get a camera to come around here. I'm sitting on top of the natural gas pipeline that was formerly El Paso. Look at the border wall. Look at the high pressure pipe. Okay, let's pan around here. You can hear it. You can hear the pressure. The pipe's being pressurized. This is a critical piece of infrastructure sitting right on the Arizona border that basically is 100% exposed. Okay, 100% exposed to terrorism. Okay, whether it's domestic terrorism or international terrorism. You take out this pipeline facility, and you take out a lot of industrial capacity, both here and in Mexico. Now, this is what I'm talking about. When I talk about the fact that we are exposed in our open border problems that are creating the crisis, it's not just humanitarian. It's not just terrorists that are going to go out and blow up buildings, okay, and kill people. It's not just essentially the drug trade. It's this right here, our industrial assets, okay? These are the lifeline of the United States. Our natural gas pipelines and our crude oil pipelines are absolutely critical to keep this country going, to keep us energy independent. In fact, now I'm an expert in energy and I know what to do with these pipes, but the reality is these are 100% exposed. If I was a terrorist, I could have come right up here, I could have planted charges, and I could have destroyed essentially what is probably the most critical transport in our compression stations along the line. This is what the problem is with the Biden-Harris open border issues. We've got to lock it down now. It's not just human trafficking, it's drugs. Industrial assets that are exposed. Bad actors are coming into the country to do bad things to this country. Okay? They're not here for the American dream. They're here to do bad things. I'm showing you this because I want you to understand how bad it is and how many things that we have to work on in this country. This is KW Miller, live from the Arizona-Mexico border.
Well, KW, thank you for going out there to show everybody what is happening out there. That's boots on the ground. This is something that, mainstream media, they certainly don't show Americans. And you brought up some really good points. And I also will bring a comment in from Facebook. Lana DeSimon, CBP should be near areas without the wall. I know they're short on officers, but instead of being where there is a wall, they should be covering our assets. And that's exactly right. That's what you're saying. These things are left unattended.
Well, yeah, Casey, and when I saw that, and I apologize, it was a very windy day, so it was a little difficult to get the video done, but when I saw that, I was flabbergasted because, given everything that we've had happen to this country, going from 9/11, to other, infrastructure attacks, to have a mainline gas pipeline, high pressure line sitting wide open right there on the Mexico-Arizona border, it just blew me away. I just could not believe I was seeing it. And that's just one example of many. And that ought to scare the heck out of all Americans. It scares me as an infrastructure man because this shows, and let me tie it together. Just recently, and this is just what we know. Just recently, 2 terrorist watch list Yemenis were captured. It wouldn't have taken any terrorist coming out of the Middle East with explosive knowledge 2 minutes to take those pipes out. That's it. They could have planted a charge and been gone, and we would have been in a whole world of hurt on our complete southern flank with natural gas supply. That's how dangerous this situation is, KC. And if we don't wake people up to the fact that we've got serious infrastructure risk, and the fact that open borders are not just a humanitarian problem, it's a national security problem, then I don't know, I don't know what it's going to take. Is it going to take another attack, another series of attacks for people to say, oh, well, we probably should have locked that down?
Well, I'm certainly very keenly concerned and aware of that as well, KW. It's something we have to worry about. I mean, we've covered a lot of different areas today. We've talked about our farmlands that are being sold to foreign entities. We're talking about the open border and unattended critical infrastructure that can be used against terrorists. And you think here, even in South Florida, I've mentioned it before, we have a Grupo Mexico owns the freight train that goes from Miami to Jacksonville, formerly Florida East Coast Railway, and they're wanting to transport LNG, very explosive material, and this is through heavy populations of 6 million people. So these are things that terrorists definitely can use. They can use our own infrastructure just as they used our own airplanes to harm us. And this is something we need to really worry about. And I know everybody's worried about the pipeline, but for LNG, for example, isn't it better to transport it underground in a pipeline than to have it go through the center of our cities and neighborhoods where, frankly, somebody has access to those trains very easily, let's say, if they want to promote or create an explosive or a bomb, just as they can right there on the border, the infrastructure that you were showing.
Yeah, no, look, the reality is what the Biden-Harris liberal socialist agenda is doing, it's making us less safe, Casey. It's making us less safe from terrorism. It's making us less safe from the transportation of highly volatile compounds, not just natural gas, but chemicals and others. These, we only transport. The rule of thumb is we only transport by rail the most critical volatile components because we don't even want to put them on the roads, right? And those are on specialized pressurized tank vessels. We don't want LNG in rail cars. It makes no sense. We build LNG terminals on the coast and then we put the gas into a pipeline. That's how it's done. So what the Biden-Harris administration, agenda is doing, it's forcing volatile chemicals and volatile components to be put on the road and on the rail across the country, which is only going to lead to disaster. Every time you turn on the TV and you see a rail car derailment, with all these chemical cars or these liquid cars, it's 50 or 100 of them laying on the side and they blow up a neighborhood and 20 people get killed and then the whole neighborhood has to be decontaminated. That's because we put those components on rail and they should have been in a pipeline.
Verna Jones, thank you for tuning in. The pipes in Fort Lauderdale have been bursting. They are so old, but more and more development is approved. All of Florida needs repair.
Well, there you go. I mean, for example, when you have Fort Lauderdale is a great example for everybody, for the nation, because the aging infrastructure in Fort Lauderdale is so bad. The sewage lines are literally falling apart on every other block, and all they try to do is wait for them to blow up. They have an environmental disaster, then they go in and patch it, and then another one blows up, and 100,000 gallons of raw sewage goes into the waterway or whatever. And it's not the way to run this. They've got to basically go in and just completely rebuild all the main lines, but they won't do it. And that's the system that's being put in place across the country, Casey, is all of these aging infrastructure sewer lines are rupturing, and they're polluting not only our land, but basically our waterways. Miami has the same problem. It
does. It's not weekly, but sometimes it feels like it about the sewage leaks that go into either the intercoastal waterways or the ocean. Lana DeSimon, it will happen, and she's talking about terrorism. It's just when. Every day I wonder if today is the day 911 will be small in comparison to what I feel is going to happen, and that's certainly a concern we all share. And Michael Burns, I believe the states should initiate a complete takeover of their own portion of the southern border by using their state National Guard. I believe we can no longer trust the federal government to protect us.
Well, I've been a big proponent, Casey, and a big critic of the border state governors for not deploying the National Guard. The National Guard is not in place to be essentially a tool of the federal government, meaning the dog and pony show we have in Washington, D.C. They're there for natural disasters and states of emergency in the home states. And Texas, Arizona, at a very minimum, should have 100% of their National Guard on those borders, locking them down. And they won't do it because the governors are, while they talk about it, they won't do it. And so I agree. And the states, remember, it's the state sovereignty that's being invaded, not the federal government sovereignty. It's the state of Arizona that's being invaded. The state of Texas is being invaded. New Mexico and California. And so the people in those states are, and I can tell you from Arizona, being down there, they've had enough, and they want the borders locked down. But the governor and the governors are so they're tied into the machine. Okay, they can't do it because they're afraid of the repercussions from the establishment.
And yet we have the National Guard still on duty in Washington, D.C.
Right, and meanwhile, terrorists from terrorist league nations. Like I said, I want to remind everybody, just in that 10.5 mile stretch and these are the ones that were caught, 27 different nationalities coming through. How many different nationalities are coming through the border at the Capitol? You see my point? I mean,
Right. Oh, I do.
you know, it's a joke. I mean, we're basically, our U.S. sovereignty, our U.S. immigration system, our U.S. security has been absolutely abandoned, Casey. And coming from somebody who was in the towers in '93 when it was hit the first time, and who worked up there I lost a lot of friends from the financial and commodity business. It's an absolute criminal act, in my opinion. As far as I'm concerned, what's happening today at the U.S. border is an absolute criminal act by the federal government and by the state government, because they're not acting to protect America from terrorists and drugs.
And, you know, as I think it was Lana that had said before, just wait and see. If it's something that you're talking about, something that you're seeing, the terrorists have thought about it long before. It's just going to be a matter of time, because our borders are open. We don't know who's coming through. And there are certainly plenty of opportunity to use, as they did before, our own infrastructure, our own commodities against us. And Lana, again, Miami Beach is the worst for roads and infrastructure. It's been a Band-Aid fix for 30 years. And, you know, that's true of around the country, right, KW? And we got to wrap up here. Our hour has flown by. But that's all America's been doing with our infrastructure is Band-Aid fixing. And it's really starting to crumble, fall apart, and come to a fruition that we need to fix our infrastructure now. A Band-Aid is no longer going to work.
Well, yeah, at some point, the engineering structures fail, Casey, and when they fail, people get killed. So you're absolutely right. And when you look at our aging bridges, tunnels, and highways, and other assets, you know, the reality is they've become a public safety hazard, you know, in many cities across the country. So, you know, again, the problem with the United States is this, and I will say this because security and infrastructure go hand in hand, right? We work hand in hand. And the problem with the United States is this: they do not react until there's a crisis, and they do not react until there's an event. So it's sad to say, as I'm sitting here today, but I can almost assure you that the United States as a country will not react to this terrorist threat until somebody is killed. And I'm not talking about one person, I'm talking about 50 or 100 or thousands, because they're not going to do anything, because it's just not the way the United States works. It's sit back and wait and react versus being proactive. And that's the problem. And then everybody's going to say, well, how did this happen? Well, I'm telling you how it happened. They came through the southern border, and they've been coming through nonstop. And they basically are, you know, they've already got their targets picked. It's just a matter of when they're going to hit them. They're going to hit power plants, pipelines, they're going to hit buildings, whatever they're going to hit. And I don't want anybody to get killed, but I'm telling you, being in this business 30 years, it's happening, it's going to happen. And then everybody's going to sit back and say, well, why did we let this happen? How did we ever open our borders after September 11? And after we went to war in Afghanistan, we went to war in Iraq, we went to war in Syria, we went to war in Yemen and everywhere else that they had jihadis. And then we basically opened our border and let them walk right in.
Lana, again, there's only 21 countries in Central and South America total. If 27 different nationalities are coming in, clearly they're coming from somewhere else. And that's, as you said, KW, just who's been caught.
That's right, yeah.
So, and we do know that I think there was a Syrian and Iranian that folks have been caught coming over the border that have been caught. So that obviously there's others. Certainly a huge issue, KW. I so much appreciate you going out there and sharing with us what you saw, giving us your opinion. You have the background and expertise in infrastructure, so what you bring to the table here has been very informative, and it's also alarming, very alarming. So Casey and KW, we're coming here from South Florida, but KW travels around, and he was out in Arizona a couple weeks, and that's where we had the border footage that you have seen. And but KW and I are on every Thursday, 10 a.m., and we're just talking about America First. KW is out there fighting the fight, and has another Facebook group that you have that is America First, right?
We do, yeah, we do. We have, well, for everybody's benefit, we have, please go to sign up. It's www.americafirstpc, as in politically correct.org. That's our website. And then we have KW Miller America First on Facebook. where everybody can congregate and make, add comments. But please join us on the website. Sign up so we can get you our updates. And look, America First is for everybody. There's no, Casey. There's no identity politics in America First. It's for everybody in this country. We have to do it the right way. Of course, we want folks to come into the country systematically every year the legal way. We cannot have open borders. It destroys the economy. It destroys our national identity. But look, we're in uncharted territories, which is why we formed the America First Foundation. And I think that's fundamentally why we do this radio show every week, is because we want to make a change. And we want to make a change in South Florida, but we also want to make a change around the country. And for everybody who's listening in Florida, they know that you and I are deeply passionate about the water, about the environment, the agriculture, but we have to do it all in unison. There cannot be one special interest group that drives the agenda. And that's something we have to continue to work on, because right now, when we talk about our food supply and our water in South Florida, special interest has really captured it. And maybe that's something we can talk about at a later date on another show.
Absolutely. Our time has run out. KW, thank you so much again for the coverage out at the border. Really, our intent is just to let people know that we really need to pay attention to who we're electing in office. Just because they have an R or a D behind their name does not mean they're looking out for America's best interest. And you've really pointed out some issues that, to this day, you went out to the border, you've shown these things, and nothing has changed yet on the border. It's still open. Folks are still coming across. Few people have said, "Oh, this is wrong," but that's as far as it's gone. And it's something that we as Americans, this is our elected officials. They're representing us. They're making these decisions for us. And here, we just can't sit quietly and let this happen, right, KW?
No, we're going to keep talking. Casey, you and I talked about this, and what the viewers know, we're here to talk, to put the issues on the table, to try to educate, and open everybody's eyes, right? So the whole thing is just keep putting the facts, the information out there, and let's keep doing that. And if we keep doing that and get people to wake up, hopefully that'll basically inspire this nation to really take action, take charge on the things we need to do.
Thank you very much, KW. We are going to sign off. Again, we're coming to you here on Facebook Live, and we also have YouTube every Thursday at 10 a.m. If you have a topic you want to have us cover, just drop us a note, private message us through Facebook, and we'd be happy to discuss that. So it's always good to look out for America First, and good having you on, KW.
Thank you, Casey.
Till next week, we'll see you Thursday, 10 a.m. from Stuart, Florida.
Bye.